Welcome to the Blackout Show, presented by the Guillen Grid, a show about the Chicago White Sox baseball, the good, the bad, the ugly. We'll debate what's working and what's not on the south side of Chicago. It's old school versus new school baseball. And most importantly, we're keeping all the receipts.
Welcome to the Blackout Show, and welcome to what we think is the start of the Chris Getz era with the Chicago White Sox. Alongside Ozzie Guillen Jr., alongside Justin Lee, I'm Slavko Bekovic. Thank you, as always, for joining us here on YouTube on the Guillen Grid, or if you're listening at home or on the road on the podcast form of this show. We've got a lot to get into tonight. Last week on the show, we got the breaking news that Rick Hahn and Kenny Williams were gone. This week, we've got to dive into the rumors that it looks like Chris Getz is the next man in charge. Multiple reports about Getz being the next man in charge, whether that's the president of baseball operations or the next general manager. We're not entirely sure yet. The White Sox have not made anything official. Last week, Bob Nightingale reported that Getz was the most likely internal candidate and that Dayton Moore would be involved somehow, some way. A lot of White Sox fans were upset because Dayton Moore, Pedro Grifol, and Chris Getz all have backgrounds with the Kansas City Royals organization, which over the last 25 years have a run differential of minus 2,661, which is dead last in all of baseball.
Not a very good offense, you're saying there, Slav. I think that this is like when you divorce. This is. I'm gonna compare it to myself. I divorced Sarah, thinking that I can get hotter and better.
This is a hypothetical. Let's just make sure people. This is not a past tense or a fact.
What the fuck is going on?
It's like he's breaking news on us.
Let's say you're thinking you can do better, or you're like, I'm gonna go hotter and better, and then you decide to just throw it all out the window, and then you realize very quickly that you don't know if it's gonna be better. Number one, and it wasn't the person you end up with after basically a 25-year marriage between Kenny the Sox and Rick Hahn. You end up with someone that it was kind of like the same. There's nothing splashy here. There's no like, oh my God, he's doing such a great job in the minor leagues. And don't get me wrong, this is a weird part. Everyone that talks about it, from Ozzie Guillen and Adrian Persinski, and they had an interview today on Foul Territory, they always have to say, oh, by the way, this is not about Chris Getz personally. And then they drop the bomb of like what they're going to say, because Chris Getz is a great guy. But then you have to say, this is not about Chris Getz personally, but looking at the track record, okay, of what he has done in the minor league system, which is not a system that you can go out and be proud of and say, oh my God, look at everything they've done. Look at all these prospects. He is the guy that built the future for the White Sox, kind of like what Kenny Williams was when Ron Schuler and he was running the minor leagues. He had built something in the minor leagues where you're like, wow, this guy really shows a big future. And then the next part is, when you're looking at the level of experience, and now we're hearing that it's a Chris Getz maybe by himself, and he's running the whole show, regardless of what the title that he has, it kind of like you're throwing the things up in the air of like, wait a minute, so you're bringing a baseball operations guy that already wants to keep this guy as a GM. So it's like you're bringing someone to be the leader, but there's already some control under it. I don't think it's what White Sox fans had in mind of when they wanted change. It seems a little bit more of like, okay, different faces, but still kind of the same storyline with just new players in the roles.
Shit's sick. It's terrible. Like, to be honest with you, like, I'm under the impression as a White Sox fan that they're not even thinking about going externally outside of the organization. So And when I hear Dayton Moore and Chris Getz, I'm like, oh, we're bringing Kansas City to fucking Bridgeport, Slav. That's what we're doing.
Well, the Dayton Moore part, I know that people have talked about stuff that he has, decisions that he's made personally, religious, his view on pornography, things that I had no idea about until I kind of like my mind was refreshed. But from a baseball standpoint, his record, is not one other than the World Series that he's won. He's kind of like Kenny Williams, where he struck, lightning in a bottle, and kind of went with it. But it's not something sustainable where you could say, oh my God, he's with the Dodgers, Atlanta Braves, even Tampa, where you've seen success year after year. And that's where I feel like people want success year after year, even more than the World Series. And that's even with the way that the White Sox won in the Ozzie Guillen era. I think that building that way is really hard. I think the best way to build is the way that you win 10 divisions in a row, and then every year you have a chance for the World Series. I'm more of that type of build than just trying to win one year and then getting lucky, getting in and doing it the whole way. I think that consistency brings something to the table. And here's the thing, the Tony La Russa vengeance, I think Tony's back in the fold without people think that Tony only gets to say his peace of mind if he has a title. I think that Tony and Jerry are still extremely close. I know that there's a Dayton Moore connection to Tony. The part that leaves a weird taste in my mouth, and the nickname that I gave him as a joke, and now it's becoming a reality, is for you Game of Thrones fans out there, is the Littlefinger reference that I made of was Pedro Grifol, Rick Hahn's original idea. Like, we were not in the room when they were coming up with that name, because all the fans thought AJ Hinch was his idea because he was a great manager, and it was like, nope, he was a guy because they were friends, regardless of his record. And the storylines are connected so well, because if Rick, I didn't think he did great, but this whole storyline of like he was not really in charge and he wanted to quit and he didn't quit. That's horrible. That means no backbone. Like, things were happening in your time. So even from the beginning, like, people that were not able to make decisions because they're being controlled, if you can't make decisions on your own, you shouldn't be in charge of anything. That's just my opinion. I don't care how smart you are, but if you're letting another human being dictate your livelihood of like, we're going to basically make you a hostage, and you don't feel smart enough to like walk away with a degree from freaking Michigan, an MBA, like all the degrees in the world, I'm going to second guess on that. So this situation here, and let's be honest, I know that we make fun of Bob Nightingale. He's
as locked into the White Sox as it gets.
He is locked in. Everything that he's said with the White Sox, it's become true. We know his connections to Tony. We know his connections to Jerry. But everything that he's pretty much laid out in the past month and a half has all pretty much panned out. But I think with the Chris Getz one is I'm just judging him on past successes. And there's no player right now, especially going down this line right now, we're just looking at the prospects where you're like, wow, he's done an amazing job. Look at these 4 or 5 guys that he's been able to build out, because right now we're second guessing, is Andrew Vaughn the guy? Who is Oscar Colas? Where is Oscar Colas? There's things out there that I'm still, there's still an asterisk to him. And the fact that he's going to be running the whole organization possibly.
That's like scary, OJ.
That's a scary thought.
So here's the thing. So we had basically 16 hours at most of hope as White Sox fans. So it was last week, Kenny Williams gets fired. I think that was obviously the most surprising part. I thought most people probably saw something happening with Hahn in one way or the other. But Kenny Williams also getting let go was kind of like a big move. And like you mentioned, Jerry pulling the plug on that was a big deal. But then literally the next morning, Bob puts out this report that Dayton Moore is going to be involved in some capacity. It didn't say specifically what that title would be if there is one. It could be some sort of consultant type thing like Tony La Russa is doing. But then we get this, Chris Getz kind of report. And then today, like you mentioned, AJ Pierzynski on Foul Territory kind of broke the news. He said he got a text. And then Don Morosi tweeted this: the White Sox likely to promote their next head of baseball operations from within. Multiple people in the industry said today. So this, to me, is the first time someone has actually put Chris Getz's name with the head of baseball ops, which I think nobody really expected. Maybe Getz could be an internal candidate to be the GM, but to actually run your baseball operations department entirely is essentially getting a double promotion. Kenny Williams and Rick Hahn were dismissed a week ago. Bob Nightingale has reported Getz is the top internal candidate. Okay, so what does that mean? Could you imagine, number one, there's questions about whether Getz is even ready to be a general manager. There's even more questions, and I don't even know if it's a question, it's just a total fact. He is not prepared to be the president of baseball operations. Imagine if Kenny and Rick were still there, and for some reason they just decided, hey, Chris, we're going to promote you ahead of Rick Hahn, 2 positions. It's unheard of because it shouldn't happen. So the Getz thing just doesn't make any sense until you realize the whole time we've heard Jerry Reinsdorf does not want to deal with a whole bunch of new people, which was why I think everyone was surprised that Kenny was let go. So Jerry basically says, if we bring in Dayton Moore in some capacity and promote Chris Getz, at least I still have this, for lack of a better term, click. Chris Getz, Pedro Grifol, and Dayton Moore are all pretty tight, all come from the Kansas City Royals, in some capacity. Obviously, there's familiarity with Getz and those guys with the White Sox in some capacity too. But for Jerry, this is him basically, it's a cop-out. You have an external candidate in Dayton Moore that comes in, gives you a fresh set of eyes, but he also knows he doesn't have to deal with that friction that Rick Hahn and Kenny Williams had, butting heads nonstop about all kinds of shit. So in his mind, all right, we promote Getz. I have one less thing to worry about. I bring in Dayton Moore, and all 3 of them with Pedro Grifol are going to be on the same page, and we can just hope and pray that they figure it out. It's not an ideal situation, to say the least. White Sox fans are not pleased if that is the trio that are now in charge of running this organization going forward. And I personally tend to agree. Getz is not qualified. And Jay, I'll give you kind of an opportunity, for those who don't know that are listening and watching, what is Dayton Moore's background outside of the one, lightning in a bottle season like Junior mentioned?
Well, make no mistake about it. Like you said, it was a lightning in a bottle season. He's been the general manager for the Kansas City Royals for 15 years, president of baseball ops for only one season, 2021. But he did win a World Series with the guys that he drafted. Let's just go through, some of the early guys: Luke Hochevar, 06, Mike Moustakas in 07, Danny Duffy in 07, Greg Holland in 07. That's a fucking haul from a draft in 2007. Now, mind you, there are some guys in there later on down the road that didn't hit so much, just like Aaron Crow. He took a big swing in the first round and he whiffed. So what? But at the end of the day, what Dayton Moore is going to hang his hat on is he won a World Series with his guys that he drafted. And Slav, we talked about it before the show. He does a good job of getting his guys to the show early. He identifies what your role is and how you can carve out a niche in the major leagues. So, it's not, I don't want to say it's all clamor or whatever. It's not even a breath of fresh fucking air, but at the end of the day, he does have some positivity on the resume.
So what happens if it's not Dayton Moore? And this is a part where I want to, because I'm hearing that there's possibly not a Dayton Moore and it's just Chris Getz on his own. So when you take away the heads,
well, someone has to be GM. Would Haber get the GM position?
I think he would just get bumped up. We didn't even know that he was the assistant.
Good Lord.
Obviously, I knew because Ozzy interviewed with him. But that keeps the same players inside the organization, okay? That keeps the same people analyzing this team, the same people that told me that Pedro Grifol was going to be a baseball genius, the same people that were there when Moncada signed, the same people that told me in the All-Star break, we're just waiting to catch the easy part of the schedule, okay? As early as the All-Star break, the White Sox, people in the front office were saying that we're not sellers. The same people that are developing these players. And I go back to this. I go back to, unless he comes in and there's a major change and he has it once he takes the job, they need to get better at developing players. I'm a firm believer, man. Every draft class, you're going to draft really good players in the first 3 rounds. Even if you go on auto pick, okay, you're going to get a good player. What are you going to do with the development of that player? And I think that's been a problem in the minor leagues. And then this year, we saw it in the big leagues where, a couple guys are doing better and the process, again, the process of what's the process. And I think that the communication, moving forward has to get better. They have Pedro Grifol as a genius stamp on this guy. But he goes in and says, "Oh, we're not in a rebuild phase," but yet everyone's put on waivers today. Guys that you think that you would want them to want to sign back with you and at least talk about it, just because of the team friendly deal that the options have with certain players. But that's the part where it's interesting. And this is a crazy part. Do you guys realize that Pedro Grifol might be more qualified to be a baseball operations than Chris Getz?
That's a great point.
Is that?
You've been saying it all year.
I'm just saying though, he's his career. Again, I give credit where credit is due. His career in the front office was a very successful one. One in many baseball circles believe that he was overlooked and overpassed on a lot of GM positions. The way that he expresses himself in the media and the way that he goes about his business, he seems more of a guy that might be more of office type of guy. Just because when you're in the field, words come and get you. You say things like, "We're not rebuilding," and then you make a move, or Michael Kopech is not built for the bullpen. Again, you're talking to the media every single day, yet he has not gone more than hasn't gone past the fifth, fourth inning in 10 starts. So I think that his baseball mindset could be better built for the front office, and that's wild that he is probably the most eligible candidate within the White Sox, and he's not even in the right position. Meaning Chris Getz, man, baseball operations is not just about making decisions. It's about how you budget and how you spread your money. Okay, how are we going to spend? Are we going a little bit more analytical? What coaches are we hiring? Who's in the minor leagues? Those are all things that you really need to have in baseball ops, where the person in baseball ops, and that's why I was surprised at like Kenny go, you're doing a lot of stuff that is like overseen and kind of overviewing everyone. The general manager is the guy that's day to day in the trenches, traveling with the team. You're making moves. You're talking to your manager after every game in wherever you're at. Now I'm assuming it's like a Zoom or like a phone call or something. Okay, Kenny and Ozzy were constant back then. It was a phone, but if you didn't travel with the team, they were constantly in contact. Of, well, we're going to call up. We need an extra pitcher. Those day-to-day GM moves are very hard to run, and then also run a baseball operations together. It's just a job that entails a lot. So for someone who's never been a GM, and by the way, being a GM is easy until they give you the job. Like I would have made a better move than that. There's a lot of things that happen in GMing more than just let's trade this guy. Who are we going to keep, who we're not going to bring, who's hurt, who's not hurt, who we're going to bring up and down. So those are the parts where even if Chris Getz might be a good candidate on paper, meaning great, there's going to be a learning curve for him. So for there to be a learning curve, okay, knowing that our owner has been financially frugal in certain ways, and that's not a knock, it's a fact.
Man, I don't know that I agree with that. That's the common narrative, but they've had top 10 payrolls pretty often in the last decade.
Stop. I mean, like when they're talking about rebuild next year, like they're saying we're not going to rebuild. So it's not like Jerry's going to say let's spend $300 million next year. Which
he's not going to pull a Cohen.
Well, he might. Who knows? He might do it. But I'm saying like for Pedro to still be giving that message, I think it's bullshit. Pardon my language. Like,
yeah, that's true.
You think we're dumb? Like literally right now, if Chris gets the job and we see moves being made, I'm like they're going to lose. They might win 90 games in 4 years. 3 if they're really good and build really fast, and that's fine. And that's what you guys have to do. Then go do it, and they failed. But the fact that he is still lying to the fans and to the media, that's where I think the miscommunication and what pisses fans off more. They shouldn't have said we're looking for the candidate to run the organization and like we're going to look externally. Don't say anything. They should have said these guys are fired. We'll talk to you guys in a couple days. Like the fact that they're trying to double down on like, yeah, but we didn't really fail this rebuild. It's like, we already know you did. And it's okay. Like we already know. Someone told me today, well, Ozzy would have fixed this. I was like, no, he wouldn't have. He might be maybe 10 games better winning. Because again, I don't think a manager gives you a 20-game difference. It depends on how it goes. But maybe him dodge a bullet. Does obviously in hindsight, do you say, well, it would have been more interesting with Ozzy and guys might have had better years? Absolutely. It's after the fact. But this disaster is so bad that I don't even think he would have made that huge of a difference. It would have been just a failure just because they were in close. Ozzy Guillen, okay, and other people, including myself, said if Pedro Grifol wins 83 games, he's manager of the year. He's not even going to be close to that. the way that they're doing this. So this has been a complete failure where they need to really look themselves internally and say, hey guys, we really need to check ourselves in here, because this is where it's dangerous. When you give the reins to someone that is not prepared to take over a company, a country, okay, anything that is that high of a priority, this is where you see countries default money-wise, companies going to complete collapses. This is giving, making a kid who's 14 years old, giving him $100 million. This is the type of move it looks like for Chris Getz right now, of you're getting someone very early in their career, giving them a lot of responsibility. And that's the part where it's scary. And let's be honest, the other part where they need to look into it is, I don't think this move sells any tickets. I think Brooks Boyer is very good at his job. Do you guys think that he's going to be able to spin this around?
No chance.
I think it's Ohtani.
I'll still go to a game or 3. I'll still go.
Again, we will still go. Here's the thing: we will still go. I'm saying we will still watch, but I'm talking about sponsors. Okay.
No, we will still watch because we have to talk about it. But a lot of people will stop.
I'm talking about sponsorship.
Yeah, the casuals are done.
The casuals, people trying to invest and saying, hey, I really want my brand to go out there. Before you're the White Sox, hey, I want to put a banner up in center field. Well, that's going to be $500,000, and you have to pay it because you have no.
The Village of Bedford Park is going to be a little bit pissed off if Chris Getz is running the show.
Correct. Or they say, hey, you know what? We're going to be back, but we're going to give you guys half of the money that we did before, and because it's a business. They have NBC's renegotiation coming up. You think NBC's going to come in and be you think if the White Sox were 10 games over 500 over in first place, and they were looking to that we're going to potentially be in the World Series for the next 3 years, you don't think the White Sox were going to use that in negotiations when they're renewing their TV contract? Just the opposite of the NBC is going to be you guys are not very good, so this is what we're going to give you. I'm just saying that's just it's business. When you are in a point of being able to make a strategic move, and you're in a point of strength, just like a manager, just like a player. When you're coming off a great season, you can demand, just like when you're in a job. But when you're in a point of a disadvantage, where you're on the bottom of the hill, you can't really be asking out there. And this is a business, and a business where there's 2 teams in town, and guess what? That other team is gaining more fans, and
they're competing right now.
They're competing. The Bears are starting to get better. The Blackhawks just signed the next Tiger Woods, Wayne Gretzky of hockey. This is an entertainment world. Now you're competing with Net. There's just a lot of things that are not going well for them as a franchise, where this move to someone who has potential, played the game, and could be, an amazing, we could be, this could be the worst clip on keeping the receipts that we're saying that we're doubting Chris Getz. But it's a very risky move. It's a very, very dangerous move. And I don't understand why, okay, bring up Getz and then keep Kenny. But I guess they were the problem was so big that they said, get rid of everybody. And again, and at this point is who's got the old man's ear? Who's talking to Jerry?
You think Jerry understands that Getz, Dayton Moore, and Pedro Grifol are all lockstep in line where he wouldn't have to deal with that internal conflict of Kenny and Rick bumping heads?
But what
you think he's okay, I got the 3 musketeers.
That's 100% what it is. Yeah,
I think it is. I think that guys go about their businesses in a different way. So here's the part where the part of that conflict, which I have a really hard time with it, is that everyone called Rick a genius, but yet everyone says that Kenny was running the team. That makes no sense whatsoever, because either one guy is or 2 guys are. In the time when Ozzy was there, okay, Kenny made the calls. Okay, he'd ask opinions. Ozzy, his staff, sometimes he was happy. He'd come down and say, we're gonna get Carl Crawford, and players and people would be like, what the
Kenny's boy.
And I'm just saying he would, and you know what? I thought it was cool because he was always thinking outside the box. He was just, he was just coming up with names
he was an aggressive GM.
He was very aggressive, and he would hear it. Again, Ozzy and his coaching staff were not PowerPoint guys. They were more a what the F are you thinking? And again, that caused a lot of conflict because Kenny would no longer be a GM. He would become a player again, and it would be players arguing over a situation where if they could be more executive-like, it might have been over a PowerPoint and breaking numbers instead of saying, this guy's just horrible, Kenny. What are you thinking? And then, but that was great because great things came out of that. Rick, I've never saw him talk in any of those conversations other than about money. I don't know what him and Kenny talked about in private, but he was like the money guy, contracts, and he was very good at that. So even when he took over, my question mark was, how much of baseball evaluation is he really doing? Okay, so is Kenny still doing the baseball evaluation? So when the White Sox were doing good, it was all Rick Hahn. When the White Sox were doing bad, it was all Kenny. Even this Ozzy situation. Oh, your dad's not the manager because of Kenny Williams. No, dude, that's not that that is way too much of a responsibility. He's not the manager because of the White Sox decided that. The problem is that the White Sox have a structure of power that has been broken from before, even from the Ozzy days of, Ozzy had a pipeline to Jerry, Kenny had a pipeline to Jerry. They at times when they were together, it was amazing, but it's like having two kids and they're both asking you for things and you're trying to make both kids happy. And when it was working, it was great. But when it got bad, it was a disaster. And it literally ended up being Ozzy and Kenny, but with Rick Hahn. The difference is that Rick Hahn is a little bit more cordial, and he was about to cry in the Tony interview. And he was like, I'm a hostage, but I won't say anything. Because the way that it seems is exactly the same problem, guys. All the stuff that's saying, like, I'm the guy in power, I'm the guy in charge, I'm making moves behind people's backs. That's exactly what Ozzy had to deal with. So unless Rick Hahn comes out with an all-tell book, I was like, that's the same situation that they were living back in 2012 where they were trying to change this stuff. So, like, how long did this happen for? So the fact that the owner let that happen for a second time, that's the part where I'm like, okay, Jerry needs to reflect and say, whoever comes into power. So here's the thing. If it's Rick Hahn and Kenny, they're out. We got to forget about that, just like Ozzie Guillen. That's behind them. If Chris Getz becomes the general manager of baseball operations, the magician, the El Presidente, El Dictador, whatever they want to call him, if it's Chris Getz's team, he calls the shots. Okay? He is not letting anybody come in the advisory group. They can get to advise him, and the king makes the calls. The king reports only to Jerry, and Jerry cannot interfere with that. If Chris Getz wants to bring in Drake LaRoche to be a motivational coach, he brings in Drake LaRoche to be a motivational coach. If he wants to sign a player within budget, then he signs that player. We cannot have this, well, it's Chris Getz, but it's Gretz and Dayton Moore and Chris Getz and Rizzo. And Chris Getz is talking to 7 advisors, and that was a Tony move, and that was a Jim Thome move, and that was they cannot have this. For the good of the franchise, if Chris Getz is going to be named the king, okay, he needs to be the king. For better or for worse, he needs to be the guy in charge, and they need to let this thing ride out, because this whole thing about sharing power and people being able to make decisions, that's not going to flag it. It's failed now, by the way, twice. It failed in Ozzy's era, because that's eventually what the breakup was of people wanted too much power, including Ozzy. By the way, dude, they banned the general manager. They banned the general manager at the time from being in the clubhouse and being on the field. That's unheard of. And I was like, we laugh about it now, like, you guys had way too much power. We laugh about it with Ozzy, like, you got your boss not allowed to be on the clubhouse of the team that he built. That's just like nutty stuff that you laugh about it now, but at the time it was like, it's a strategy move. But it was like, no one realized how bad it was, that's where it got, like, they don't fly together on the same plane. So one, the guy's taking like charter. So that sort of things, listening now, what's coming out of like the stories that we're hearing, like the rumblings and stuff, it happened twice, because it seemed like the breakup from them two was not a very strong one. It wasn't very public, but what's coming out from the news and stories is that they were not seeing eye to eye in any of these points. So the point where it looks like Kenny made a trade without even having Rick's consent. Rick came in and it was like a Moneyball scene where, where's Carlos? I just traded him to the Tigers. What do you
Where's
mean?
Jake Berger? I just traded him to the Mariners.
I'm just saying, by the way, it happens a lot more, and it was probably a blindside and probably one that might have cost Kenny his job potentially, where Jerry was like, you cannot do that. Like, you're trading a piece of
a fan favorite and their second best productive bat.
Yeah, and
a prolific draft pick too.
Well, here's the thing, though. Considering the fact that you're making a committee decision the whole time, and then you just went out and made this one on your own, you're not keeping the committee decision making type of like decisions. So we're in a band and we make a decision as a whole, and that's how we've been doing business, even if it's bad business. But this is the way that we do business. This is the Chicago White Sox way. He went completely out on that one rogue, and seems like he left everyone behind, where everyone was like, wait, what just happened? So I think that's what they need to stop in this situation, regardless of who takes over. There needs to be one jefe, one boss. And by the way, this whole Jerry sell the team, he's going to sell when he wants to sell. Okay. He's not going to sell.
If he truly decides to sell.
So let's and even then, like, here's the thing that's interesting, Slav. We get 2 years.
NJ. You don't have to just talk to me.
No, I'm saying I was going to tell you this because this is for you. What happens? Okay. No, there was a question for you. I said, what happens if in 2 years, in 3 years, in the middle of this process, Jerry sells the team? Okay, or something happens in the ownership. Do fans think that a new ownership is just going to come and continue the same plan, or they're not going to blow it up again? So if you don't do this the right way, you can be in the middle of a 4-year rebuild, and new ownership comes up, and now it becomes 8 years instead of 4. So I'm 55 and they still haven't won, they potentially might have not won a division. That's where the part's really scary. Of when you're so close to selling.
I can't bring a child into the world without a White Sox.
I'm serious, man. Like, people think like 4 years in baseball terms, like an election, it's 4 years is a long time.
It is.
4 years is a very,
so
very long
here's
time.
The last thing I'll say on Getz. We all agree, I think unanimously across White Sox nation, he is not qualified to be the president of baseball ops. The one thing I do have faith in is that whatever decision Jerry makes, it's going to be the one with the least amount of friction across the board, and specifically with people reporting to him. Think of every coaching change in sports history. You have one type of person, and then you go to the opposite type of person, right? You go from Ozzie Guillen to Robin Ventura. You go from Tom Thibodeau to fucking pacemaker Fred Hoiberg. Like, you're always going to do the opposite. Rick and Kenny, for so many years, were butting heads. He's going to go whoever it is, whether it is Getz or Dayton Moore. And it's very possible that Dayton Moore is just kind of being consulted in some capacity. Junior, you said, there's some connections with Tony and Dayton Moore. Maybe that's what Bob Nightingale heard, that Dayton Moore is involved somehow. Maybe it was just Jerry vetting the process and saying, hey, Dayton, do you think Chris Getz is ready if we gave him this type of job? Jerry should probably know that himself, having, worked and seen him fairly closely, not obviously very hands-on, but he should know who Chris Getz is and whether he's qualified or not. It's just the number one thing that I go back to with Chris Getz. Look at the numbers. From major leagues through rookie ball, this season, the White Sox have the worst organization in baseball, the worst overall run differential. There are 700 runs in the negative total from major leagues to rookie ball. In Chris Getz's tenure, the minor league system has not been very good, partially because maybe they've rushed some guys and gotten guys to the big leagues very quickly. That might have something to do with it. But again, you've mentioned this, Jay, so many times, Junior, you too. Like, what have they truly developed? What identity do they have as an organization, as a system? Where are these players when someone goes down? It's like, oh shit, we don't have anything left. We got Rami Gonzalez, Rami like Tommy. So I have no faith that Chris Getz is qualified. I have no faith that he's going to do a great job. But if that's what it is, you got to start somewhere. It's not Rick and it's not Kenny. I feel like it's probably going to end up being much of the same. But that's all I've got to say. Getz I can't see it.
So, a couple thing about Getz. Number one, Freddie Garcia was like, I should have been nicer to Getz when he was a player. That was a text message that I got from Freddie Garcia because he was laughing. Because he's like, man, Getz is going to be the general manager, or potentially. And that's kind of like everybody's joke right now because they play with him. I'm very excited if it is Getz because I've partied with Chris Getz. So I can say that a guy that I've partied with, a guy whose cell phone I have, a guy that I really don't see him as like I don't know if I'm just getting old. I don't see him as like, I always saw Kenny as like this dude, like hell, like it's Kenny Williams, like an adult.
He was an authority figure to you when you were young.
To me,
now Chris Getz is just a dude.
I see Chris Getz and I'm like, yo, what's up, dude? Like, how's it going? I just saw him at the ballpark.
It'd be like if Gonzo became the GM. We'd be like, oh, it's fucking Gonzo.
It's Gonzo. Yeah. So for me, it's like, this is kind of wild because, and Chris is a great guy and he's probably going to be top 5 best looking general managers to in Major League Baseball automatically.
And really, that's what's most important.
I'm just saying, though, definitely the best looking White Sox general manager they ever had, because I just saw the list is, he's better looking than everybody. But that's what I'm saying. Like, and I think that I'm gonna say something real quick though for Chris Getz, if he does get the job, and
you never say anything real quick.
No, I'm saying, well, I'm not to just so we can move on Chris Getz because we don't want to beat a dead horse, but if he gets the job, and I had to give him one advice, is make the change even though you're internal. You know what I mean? Like, even though if you needed support internally to get the job, don't hold back once you get the job to make the moves just because you want to be loyal to people in there and keep sucking. Make the moves. Once you become the man, clean house. Clean up your baseball department. If you have to fire your manager, guys, and it's not because Ozzie Guillen, because after this situation and if Ozzie manages another team, I want it to be San Diego, freaking the Mets. It's somebody that's not the White Sox, because this team needs just a really big cleanup that I don't want him to be anywhere near this.
Stop going back to the well. Stop going back to the well.
So, like, literally build and clean up. So if you have to fire Pedro, even though he might have been like your buddy when he was in there, get him out of the manager's job, clean up the coaching staff. If that's what you think is going to make the White Sox better, I still think that just because you come in and you had a connection to the Chicago White Sox, if you think that the reason that you have not been successful in the minor leagues was because there was too much baggage and too many guys that don't know how to develop, clean house. That's the part where I think if Chris Getz, that's where his opportunity lies of like, hey guys, I'm addressing the media. I know that my record has not been a very good one. I'm going to address that because at the time that I was here, I was not allowed to make moves to make myself better in these different ways. Now that I'm the boss, that's going to happen. And that's where I think the fans are going to see the change. Because I told someone this, I don't care if it's Moore, if it's Rizzo, if it's Ozzie Guillen and Frank Thomas, if it's Ozzie Guillen, Frank Thomas, and freaking Ruby and Rubart. It doesn't matter if they would have kept the same people. Like, a head doesn't change. Whoever comes in that position needs to be able to convince Jerry and be able to have the cojones to just make moves and say, you've been here for 23 years, you're fired. You're not here, you're not developing, you're gone. We need more analytics, guys. Really make changes, because that's what I think this department.
You think Chris Getz got the power to change Jerry Reinsdorf's mind?
I think Jerry, to be honest with you, I don't think Jerry ever really would have cared if those guys would have created change. I think if Rick and Kenny would have fired a bunch of people and made moves, I don't think Jerry would have cared. Because when they wanted to fire guys like Ozzie Guillen and Greg Walker and Don Cooper, Jerry said yes to it. So I don't think it was a Jerry thing. I think it was their own fault. So I don't think Jerry just lets you do what you want to do. I literally think that Chris Getz can literally, if Jerry picks Chris Getz, I literally think Chris Getz can come in here and do whatever he wants. Make whatever changes he needs to make. Release any guy he needs to release and sign guys and really make a foundation of building around. I don't expect Getz to come here and land the number one free agent, because I just don't think they're in that situation. But I really do think that they really need to look internally, and he really needs to say, okay, like, who can I save from this group that's going to help me take it to the next level? But who do I need to get rid of? And I think that's what's going to give the fans hope, because you cannot keep the same everyone around minor leagues to the big leagues and expect change when you're only changing the leaders. That's not going to happen.
It's a good point, and something I've never considered either. Go ahead, Jay.
No, I was just going to say we probably won't figure out what Chris Getz and White Sox front office the plan is until probably December, when we start moving a couple names and everything, and when we start investing in younger talent. That's what I'm looking into, is what does Chris Getz want to build his regime on? You've seen him make the trade for well, not him, but White Sox made the trade for Cueto and Corey Lee. Is the catcher position that the White Sox want to restart and get strong at?
It's Salvi Perez next year.
Come on, bro. Don't do this to me, man.
It doesn't make sense. Well, it makes sense to the White Sox. It doesn't make sense to anybody with a freaking rational brain, but I can see it happening.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just want to see where he wants to plant the seed, because for my White Sox life, we've been first base university. you know, does that change with the new front office? Is there another position to where we could plant the seed and have probably 20 years, 25 years of dominance? Who knows?
25 years of dominance.
Yeah.
4 years of dominance. Come on, let's not get
crazy. You're crazy. Come on, let's go. Going from the Big Hurt to Paulie to Jose Abreu.
Am I not mistaken? They've never had back-to-back playoff appearances. 2020 doesn't count to me.
Well, they had the baby one. They had the.
2020 does not count to me. They've never made back-to-back playoff appearances.
If you never count 2020, they've never had a back-to-back. Even in Ozzy's tenure, it just never happened. Again, those are things that
they're like 600 years old.
Correct.
Fuck. Any final thoughts, Jay, on Getz or Dayton Moore?
Yeah, I mean, like OJ, you just said it. They never had back-to-back fucking playoff appearances. You don't have a chance to have a Brett Lawrie, or you can't go out and trade for Nick Swisher, Chris Getz. So you better fix this and fix it fast. You're running out of options. I'm losing patience.
If and when Getz does get announced, I'd be very eager to see. First of all, he should have a press conference. I would be stunned if they didn't have one with Getz. I really hope that Jerry would be a part of that press conference. I'd say the chances are less than 1% that he's involved, but he really should be. We've not heard from him since Kenny and Rick got fired.
But did he?
You're appointing if Getz what?
He didn't talk though, right? He just gave the statement.
No, he just gave a statement. Yeah, it was just a statement. So he's not spoken to the media, and he rarely does, to be fair. He's not required. I mean, but if you do make Chris Getz the president of baseball operations, essentially your number 2 person in the entire organization in the baseball side of things, Jerry should be involved and should have a press conference. And I would imagine he would get a lot of questions about Rick and Kenny, that relationship, and why ultimately they decided to give it to Chris Getz if it is a president of baseball ops position. The other noteworthy kind of nuggets that Nightingale's been dropping is this potential like relocation and the stadium situation that the White Sox currently have. Their lease is up at Guaranteed Rate Field in 6 seasons. Bob Nightingale reported that there are 3 separate locations outside of 35th and Shields that the White Sox have discussed internally. The United Center area on the west side, Soldier Field on the lakefront, and then, of course, the south side, Arlington Heights, Chicago White Sox, which makes zero freaking sense. What are you guys' thoughts on the Arlington Heights Sox?
Never.
It would be called that, by the way.
They would not, of course. That would be stupid. But it's also stupid to move the south side team 600 miles north.
It's called Chicago.
Never.
Yeah, but in pro sports, okay, the Dallas Cowboys are like forever away from Dallas. Like,
yeah, I think
there's a lot of suburban ballparks. They're the Arlington Rangers, you know.
Yeah, so I think that the Arlington Heights one, it depends on like what they can talk to with the Bears. When you look at Sophie Stadium and what they've been able to do there, the square footage of the land where that was built, the best stadium in the United States, it's actually smaller by a lot what the Arlington Heights actual area of land that they bought. So it would be a conversation of what they could do there with the Bears, because the Bears would be the owners of the land and they would have to either lease it or, you know, they would have to, you know, do something there. I think the part that's very interesting, okay, I hate the Soldier Field idea. I think that's the worst idea ever. But I am open to either doing something in that current stadium of some type of renovation, or if you find an area to build where you can keep the team in a Naperville, kind of like one of those southern suburbs, and really find another location, thinking futuristic. And I'm not thinking about 5 to 6 years. Number one, because the ballpark is one of the oldest ballparks in Major League Baseball. Okay, I still think the Guaranteed Rate is one of the best fields. You know, meaning from when it was built to now, it looks awesome still. But I think that in order for the team to sell, they need to either have a lease in place, okay, for the new owner to come in, or some type of project where there's talks or somewhat of a new stadium being built. I don't think somebody's going to buy a team and then be on like I think the lease is up in 6 years. I think that's the most realistic thing. I don't think the team's going to be moving cities. But I think where they play in that conversation is one that could be very interesting because, again, the owner does not own the stadium. It's owned by the state. And that's where that situation, again, the United Center, connections to Jerry and the Bulls, having a whole area down there, which I think would be an amazing area as well. But I think that it's something that it's more realistic on building a new arena, something potentially with this, dome, and you can do other things and kind of build out. I go back, man. I think that looking at how stadiums are built now, I think that the situation where they have never been able to build around Bridgeport for Mayor Daley or for whatever reason it ever was, it's really hurting them now. And that's why I think that they'll eventually move because I think in modern day sports, that's not what sports teams are looking for, of just having a stadium sit in one place to go to the stadium and to leave. I think they're really looking for an entertainment area. And right now that's really hard to be built where it's currently sitting.
Did you guys see the renderings ever of the proposed Comiskey Park at Armour Square?
No, never saw it.
So Google it. There's a really great story out. It came out a few years back. It would have been really almost like Polo Grounds dimensions, not quite that extreme, but they were going to really try to build it like between city blocks. It would have been a really, really cool ballpark. I can't remember the details of why that never came to be, but there are options in the Chicagoland area and in the city proper that the White Sox, if they were exploring building a new stadium somewhere, there's options there. I live here in Tinley Park, and just actually like a month ago, there was
I was just about to say,
there's like 250 acres that are right off of I-80 that was an old mental health facility that has been owned by the state of Illinois for years. It just sold to the Tinley Park District for $1, and they're going to be doing like sports fields and tournaments and that type of stuff. That was prime location for any of the Chicago teams, the Bears included. You have a ton of space. It's right off the highway, and there's enough kind of agricultural area close enough where if you needed parking or transit with trains and whatnot, it would have been made a lot of sense. It kind of would have sucked for the construction for me living there, but that's certainly not an option anymore. I don't hate the Soldier Field idea, assuming that the Bears leave. If Soldier Field becomes the White Sox home, you obviously need to kind of rework what that looks like and the seating, and it's obviously built for soccer and football. Can they structurally or engineer something that makes it an actual baseball stadium? It would be pretty cool to be right on the lakefront. You're close to the city. You've got some skyline potential. Great scenics and. The Goodyear blimp comes through, blah, blah, blah. United Center, think about it. The Bulls already have a studio in the United Center now, in the atrium that was, just renovated in the last 5 or 6 years, whatever that is. Jerry has ownership with the Bulls, with the White Sox. Maybe there's something potentially that they can figure out there if they can put the stadiums close enough to each other. That's another option. To me, Arlington Heights is easily the worst idea, because it's just so far from the city. However, if you are in now some sort of partnership with the Bears and Kevin Warren and the McCaskey family, that's a different story. If you can organize similar to what the first thing that comes to mind is in Detroit, they have Ford Field and Comerica Park basically right on the same block. In Arizona, they have in Glendale, the Arizona Cardinals football stadium and I think the Coyotes' old rink were right next to each other.
Cincinnati too. They got Great American and the Bengals stadium too.
Right. So if you can figure out a way to kind of make that cohabitate those two stadiums and make it one big kind of sports area, now you're onto something. I do think it would be very weird. Generally speaking, there's a lot of Cubs fans on the north side. Arlington Heights is very north. It would be a little out of place, but at least from a business perspective, there's some potential there.
Yeah, I mean, out of the two choices, I like the Sox moving next to the United Center because obviously you could have like a whole Reinsdorf like shrine of all its championships.
Do a Jerry statue right next to the Jordan statue.
Exactly, but the Bears are trying to have like a Hall of Fame park at the new stadium. You could do something like that with both your teams if you move the Sox there. But I've already convinced myself, like, man, if the Sox move to Tinley Park, most of your fan base is south of there. you could accommodate the Indiana fans too. It's easily accessible. Like, it would have been a no-brainer, Slav, but you said it's off the table.
Yeah, it's a
Right?
shame. I mean, there's a lot of space. As far as I know, that deal is done. Tinley Park District purchased that
Bourbon
land from the
Street
state of
after
Illinois.
the White Sox. Bourbon Street after the White Sox, man. That could have been
Wow,
great.
Bourbon Street. What do you know about Bourbon Street in Tinley Park?
Don't worry about that. Don't worry about that.
All right, last thing before we get out of here. Today was an interesting day in Major League Baseball with all the people put on waivers, including Mike Clevenger. So I think there's a lot of people that saw this and immediately thought, oh my God, they're cutting Mike Clevenger. Why didn't they just trade him? There's a lot of guys on waivers in Major League Baseball today. It's essentially, it's not a formality, but it allows transactions to happen. If somebody was to claim Mike Clevenger, they would be able to then pay the rest of his contract. The White Sox would no longer have to pay the salary remaining on Clevenger, which is, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere around $1.5 million for the remainder of this season. He had an $8 million deal this season. There's a mutual option included in his contract, which would be maybe beneficial for the White Sox to get rid of. It's a $12 million deal, meaning the White Sox would have to agree to bring Clevenger back, and Clevenger would also have to agree to return to the White Sox or whoever it is that picks him up off waivers. There's a $4 million buyout if that option is exercised by both parties. So that might be a reason teams would be not willing to pick him up. But certainly, guys, I think Clevenger has pitched his way into at least a multi-year deal. Whether that's with the White Sox or not, we don't know. But it'll be interesting to see if anyone jumps on him in the next 2 days. Lucas Giolito and Reynaldo Lopez also placed on waivers today by the Angels.
Yeah.
So I think essentially the people that are put on waivers are players that potentially teams are gonna pick up. I've seen fans on Twitter, by the way, the cesspool, I should call it, by its rightful name, that they're like, why is Yasmani Grandal not on waivers? And it's like, well, no one's gonna pick up Yasmani Grandal off of waivers, so why even put him on waivers? So I think they've only put players who they think that could potentially help a team. So the Mike Clevenger makes sense. I think that the Clevenger one, the only part where I see it as a downfall is I have Clevenger on my roster next year if I'm a general manager, because I think even while you're rebuilding, you still want to be some type of competitive from a pitching standpoint, so you don't lose 100+ games. Somebody has to pitch. But if they think that, they really want to move parts with him, or they think they can sign him in the offseason for something better if he does opt out of that contract, again, you don't see anything, you don't see any issues. The part that's interesting is people are saying, oh, Rick Hahn's a genius because of the Lopez and Giolito. I think that they took a chance. Anaheim took a chance renting out 2 players that now they're trying to move for money, because again, they took those contracts and trying to move for something just because they're not going anywhere. So they're trying to savor what they have from there. And it goes back to tell you, those prospects that the Angels gave away, it was for a rental player. So they weren't amazing first rounders, like, oh my God, these guys are guaranteed, because of the time of control the players are going to have. So the book is still open on those guys, but not surprised. I think Ronaldo will get picked up for sure. Giolito a team might pick him up just because of who he is. And I think Clevenger doesn't make it through waivers. I think a team takes him. I would love it that the Cleveland Guardians took Clevenger.
Come on, man.
Picked up the options and then he shoved it against the Sox next year.
That would be something.
Because I just saw the waiver list. But there's interesting teams. The Mets, again, every team on the top is kind of like the builders for next year. But I was trying to find the waiver list where Texas Rangers are, for example, a team that they need all the pitching they need. The Astros. That's what I was looking at to see what teams could potentially land these guys.
Jay, you had one team that you liked for Clevenger.
Yeah, I mean, the Diamondbacks could be a pretty good haul for him too. If Cincinnati hangs around long enough, I'm pretty sure they could do well with a guy like that. But just look at the body of work that Clevenger put up so far. I mean, a sub-4 ERA. 1.2 whip, obviously, but he's been striking out a lot of people, and his stuff is really good right now. Like his last start, 96, hit 97 a couple times. So it's not like you're getting a guy past his prime. This is the best stuff I've ever seen him throw.
Ooh.
And you're
So
throwing
here's,
him on
here's a
paper.
question, though.
That's a
waivers.
little much.
What's the list on the
How?
waivers right now?
In
what's
his
the list?
peak in Cleveland, he had better stuff and he was more dominant than he is
He was
now.
getting better results. But I'm talking about the ball spinning and leaving his hand.
Ooh,
Like
analytics.
his fastball this year has been absolutely
Is
outstanding.
Gonzo texting you? Is this like a Gonzo comment?
Don't worry about that.
Was
Don't
that like
worry
a
about
Gonzo?
that.
I was not expecting that from.
I'm just saying,
Justin
White
Lee
Sox,
from Jay.
the cesspool told me, OJ. The cesspool
I'm just
told
saying, though,
me.
that's a very Gonzo comment because Gonzo's a big baseball savant. We know he's on vacation, but that was like
Clevenger
something that
been
would
very
be
good.
expecting. He does feel good, though. I'm going to be honest with that. I know Clevenger. I know guys that are very close to Clevenger.
What did Baltimore just go ahead?
I'm just saying he just feels very good. But what's the list? Because here's the other part. There's players that get picked up on waivers so other teams don't get them in the pennant race. That's another tactical move. So when you're looking at the list, if you're in the pennant race, you can always use an arm because you're not going to be able to just trade for a guy in later in the run. So if you're one of the top teams, you're trying to move for all three guys, for Giolito, for Lopez, and for Clevenger, just because I think they're arms and they're very good arms, and you could potentially use them, not use them, you can have them there and not pitch them. Somebody else doesn't get to use them. So waivers is a very interesting and very tactical way to be able to move money, which the White Sox at this current moment, it doesn't hurt them. So I'm a big fan. And for the fans out there that are talking about putting guys like Jasmani on waivers is not going to do anything. What you could do with him is release him. At this point is like, what's the point?
Yeah.
You should have done it, a month ago. But right now it's like, let it ride out. Elvis too, let it ride out and see what you get, and kind of just finish out the year.
Yeah, you're not losing
those
anything.
guys groom Corey Lee and Lenny and Sosa. That's realistically all that they're there for at this point.
Yeah. No. I by the way, going on that, I'm actually very happy for Lenny and Sosa. I liked whatever he was doing in the minor leagues. Is kind of transitioning. We're seeing a little bit more confidence in his at bats, kind of a little bit more mature. Lenny and Sosa from his previous times that he was sent down. So that was kind of like a flash of hope for them on a prospect level. But there was some growth coming on there. By the way, and it was so going back on that, people wanted Chris Getz not to be qualified because the whole Omar Vizquel and Wes Helms and all that happened under Chris Getz's watch. And I said, it's not a positive one, but there's a lot of other things that could have been used against him other than like what happened off the field with certain guys. But it's going to be interesting because we know him very well. So his leash is going to be very short if he is a guy. But right now, if he's a GM, he's making waiver moves. So we got to see what he does.
Yeah.
Yeah, theoretically, if he is the interim GM at this point, he was the one that put Clevenger on waivers. So I guess that's if Rick Hahn and Kenny Williams were with the White Sox right now, would Clevenger be on waivers?
No, because they would probably try to deal with him and try to sign him and agree on that $12 million player team option.
Because we would definitely need a Mike Clevenger next year to fill out the
You're just saying, though, you have guys on the list, and it's Cease. You don't know what's going to happen with Michael Tukey. I know guys like Gonzo, like Eric Crochet. We don't know that. He might be a starter for half the season, and then his innings are up. So, like, you need people to throw, and there's really isn't anybody in the minor leagues where you can say, oh, yeah, just throw him out there. Mike Clevenger is a veteran pitcher who eats innings up. And here's the best part. If you have control of Mike Clevenger and you're not in competition and he pitches really well, you can move a guy like Mike Clevenger. Just like the Cubs signed Marcus Stroman. They're like, it makes no sense. If they're good, they use them. If they're bad, you move them in the middle of the year and you're gonna get a boatload for
the
him.
only reason why Marcus Stroman wasn't moved because he was hurt around the deadline.
Correct. And they're in it. And again, they're like, and they're kind of like fighting. So it's really hard to be like, we're going to get rid of a guy. But when you sign guys, look at what Johnny Cueto did for the White Sox. Like, there's guys that you can move in the middle of the year if you sign them and they do well, that when you're rebuilding, those are times where you have to think and say, okay, I'm going to sign this veteran guy. If he's good and I move him, I might be able to get one or two pieces for the future. And that's what Chris Getz needs to start thinking right now. This whole thing, like, they think they're going to be able to patch this up and pull Salvador Perez at home plate and, bring Marco Conforto or sign Cody Bellinger, and you're going to be like, putting three or
Ross Globe, the hidden coach.
Oh, I'm just being serious. This is not the 2000. By the way, this is not the 2003 White Sox where you added a manager, and they got a little bit better. And then from 04 to 05, you kind of just moved a couple guys in the roster, and then you were able to compete. This problem's a little bit deeper than that. And that's where I think that where they need to actually look at it. And we'll see what Chris Getz kind of can make his magic.
All right, last thing tonight is picks to click. Somehow, some way, Jay wins with Yohan Moncada, and he's now tied for second with me at 5. Gonzo's cheating his way to a lead. He's got 7. Junior, you're holding up the rear with 3. So
I'm like
Moncada,
Pedro falling this. Came out supposed to be favorite, and I'm what a horrible pick to click.
Moncada with another double here just a second ago against the Orioles. So he's had a heck of a go lately. So Jay, congrats to you. You got 5, and you get the first pick for this week. Moncada's off the board.
Wow. So you took the best player in franchise history off the board. It doesn't matter. Give me Tim Anderson. This train steady keeps going. The train has left the station, TA7. Let's win another week next week.
If my reading skills are okay, Gonzo left. So it should go. It's Jay, Slav, Junior, and Gonzo for these 4 picks this week. So if you are taking TA, I am 1,000% taking Luis Robert because I got to catch Gonzo. I was talking a lot of shit at the beginning of the season when I was off to like a 4-0 lead, and it's been pretty cold since then. Junior, you got next.
You know what? I'm gonna ride the veteran on here. I think I'm gonna keep riding Andrew Benintendi.
Ooh. Okay, and then so Gonzo's top 2 picks were Robert and Benny. So he gets his boy Lenine Sosa, who playing some good baseball lately. So Jay has Tim Anderson. I've got Luis Robert. Junior's got Andrew Benintendi. Gonzo gets Lenine Sosa. Gonzo is absolutely shit-canned somewhere in Las Vegas, apparently. Maybe we'll get him back next week like Dennis Rodman. We might have to send somebody over there to go pick him up. But shout out to Gonzo for finally taking some time to unwind. I think the Rick Hahn, Kenny Williams stuff really got to him. He had to take an episode off.
It did a number on him. He had to take a couple vacation days.
He's been real quiet in the group chat lately too. I think Gonzo might be going through it.
Little Rick. I just think it's gonna be wild because I don't think he was a big Getz. I think that Gonzo thought that they were gonna bring in a new whole, regime, and I thought again I was holding hope for a Jeff Lumhow kind of like
your boy.
My boy, write another book. But again, I don't even know they even talked to anybody. But it's going to be interesting. We're going to wait and see. At least we're going to have topics to talk about in the coming weeks because it's going to be very, very interesting. And even that press conference, again, think about the disaster the last one was. Not during the press conference, but like what we look at the press conference as like now, what Chris Getz is going to look like, and everybody's going to be right on every word that he says. So it's going to be interesting.
There is never a shortage of stuff to talk about with this team. It is always some drama, some BS. Basically, since Rick Renteria was actually, you know what? This has been chaos since the White Sox clinched a playoff spot in 2020. You remember they were the first team in the Central to clinch. Everyone thought they were going to run away with the 60-game division, and then they choked. They got their ass handed to them by the then Indians and scuffled into the playoffs. Then Rick Renteria blew it in Game 3 because Garrett Crochet got hurt. And ever since then, it's been downhill. Nothing good has happened other than one good Dylan Cease season and this year's Luis Robert season.
And Brian Goodwin.
Next week, we're going to talk about what are the chances of Robert to being a top 3 MVP finalist with Ohtani being out completely right now. And how crazy would it be if he does get that high and then they're not even close to winning anything, which would be wild, just like Ohtani did last year. And here's the other part. I'm going to say this right now. The season that the White Sox should have gone for it, okay, in the season that they had the best shot to winning a World Series was the COVID year. That was their year.
Mm-hmm.
That was their year.
That was you're probably right.
It was a short season, so health wasn't an issue. Nobody knew them. If they could have just gone for it. And no fans in the stands, no media. These guys were just living like in a perfect world for a perfect White Sox team of like, we only have to play 60 games. We're not going to get hurt. No one's going to bother us with questions. We're like in our own little bubble, legitly, and we're going to play it. That was their year. If they go all out and they get past Oakland, man, I think that team at least makes it to the World
They
Series.
could have ran the table. They could have ran
the table. I really believe that was the year. Like when Rick Hahn right now sitting in his underwear thinking about how could I have made this possible, he needs to go back to that season. That was his year.
So Giolito started game 1. Was it Gio, Keuchel, and then Dane Dunning, right? Like Cease wasn't the guy yet.
No, but
if Cease had
maybe, but here Dane Dunning, or go to Cease after that, or just ride Dane Dunning like you had all year, or
that's what I'm saying.
Or trade for Lance Lynn, like Rick Renteria asked you to, and you could have had him for the playoffs.
That's the one thing that I get upset with Renteria is you took Dane Dunning out for a bullpen guy, but you didn't put in a bulk innings eater afterwards. So you just had no fucking plan. That was just an impulsive situation.
Well, no, he had a plan. He had everything mapped out, but Crochet got hurt. He knew Dunning was gone the first time he ran into trouble, whether it was the first inning or the third inning. Dunning was never going to go deep in that ball game unless he had a perfect game going.
I was like a lever. Get in trouble, lever.
Exactly. It was, he hit the dump button. And he's like, all right, we're going to the guy. Remember how electric Crochet was. He had like 11 appearances, like barely got touched, was throwing 101. Like he was unhittable. So he's like, all right, I'm going to go to my secret weapon real quick. Crochet gets hurt. Then he was just never able to. That game is the turning point. That game was the turning point.
Nick Magical errors. Fucking Nomar Mazara taking strike 3 at his knees.
Greatest home run in the window era. Larry Garcia playoff.
Your
boy. Not Tim Anderson in the woods in freaking Iowa. It's Larry Garcia home run to take the lead in the only game they won in the rebuild.
Wow.
Well, now we have another window. The next window is going to be in the Chris Getz era, potentially, question mark. So nothing official yet, but it looks like all signs are pointing to Chris Getz as the next man in charge. For a drunken Las Vegas man, Chris Gonzalez. For Ozzie Guillen Jr. For Justin.
Wait, we're not going to do the all time.
Oh, that's right. MLB. Yeah, Jade. What are we going to do? Tell us our new game.
So it kind of sucks because I know Gonzo wanted to be here when we do this, but we're going to do the MLB all time at every position. So today we're going to do. I'm kidding. Don't cry.
We wanted to get Gonzo riled up.
It's a joke.
Oh, I wish I would have. I would have participated because Gonzo wasn't here.
You would have picked.
We'll text the group chat as soon as we go off air. Like, oh, Gonzo, you missed it. Like we did the great MLB catchers.
I would have participated and been all about it just if Gonzo wasn't here.
Wow.
We've got
some names. I know Gonzo's going to come up with some non-Hall of Famer random
Greg Zahn
that no one knows about. That's just like he's going to bring like the Gonzo's
Benito like Santiago.
Like Ben Zobrist has the same word as Carlos Delgado. Like he's gonna bring. They're the same player. I'm like, no, they're not. They're not even this. They're not even the same area code.
Check the Babbitt.
Brooke Fordyce.
Yeah, it's like. By the way, so
Logan Forsythe.
I did not know this. I did not know that Dayton Moore had traded for Chris Getz, and he sent us Mark Tien. That's the reason I'm mad at him. He screwed us up.
Mark Tien was a good player
against
the Kansas City Royals.
The City Royals.
Yeah, I mean, you can say that for everybody.
I'm just saying though, like he took us on that one.
Yeah.
A lot of people have taken the White Sox on trades, unfortunately.
Oh my God.
By the way, breaking news: Brian Shaw pitched again, because that's really what's most important for this season. Is that Brian Shaw gets more. How many
games is that guy at right now?
Yes.
What a
consistency.
He's the new Jimmy Cordero.
We need consistency from the organization. Right. I'm glad we're getting it.
Thank you, Brian Shaw, for giving us the foundation we've been looking for.
Yes.
Real quick, last thing. Shout outs. Anybody got any shout outs?
No.
Shout out to Asia. She's been working 50 hours a week. Absolutely outstanding. The cake lady herself.
Love it. Chris Getz, I love you. If you get the job, don't forget we were boys. So need that insights. I believe in you. We get it. I believe in you, Chris.
I'm going to shout out Ozzie Sr. I was texting with him the other day, and he wished me a happy birthday on the broadcast, and he didn't say it to his wife, Ebis. We have the same birthday, so shout out to Ozzie Sr.
That is a
and Cog Hill. Shout out to Cog Hill.
Yes, Dubs today.
That's who we need. That's who we need to get a sponsor for us.
Yes, and you got to do a show from there. They have a nice little area.
We do a show from. I'll tuck my shirt in if we at Cog Hill for a show.
They got a nice little area there for adult cocktails and food. Nice little area, nice little shindig.
We love adult cocktails.
Yes.
All right, boys, good show. Thanks everybody for watching. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at Blackout Show CHI, Facebook, Instagram. Apparently Gonzo has a tickety talk, so go check those out too. I don't know what he puts on there, but yeah, we're on TikTok too. And download if you are watching now live on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Google Play or all those other Pippity podcast places that y'all get, and download it and subscribe. And thank you, and we love you, and good night.